Hello everyone! Oops, my name is Wesley, this is Woo Can Cook. Today I'm cooking a Japanese cutlet bowl called Katsu Donburi. Today we're going to be doing it with some leftover chicken katsu cutlet. You can commonly find it done with many different kinds of meat. Probably the most common one is done with pork, which is called a tonkatsu. Today we're doing a chicken katsu cutlet bowl because I made chicken katsu a couple of weeks ago and we have leftover chicken katsu. So that's what we're working off of today. As with a lot of the streams that you can catch on here, this particular chicken katsu cutlet bowl that we're doing today has a recipe that goes along with it. Those always live over on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't hopped over to the YouTube channel and checked out some of those recipes, they're always over there. And if you're trying to reproduce the things that I'm cooking, that's generally a good place to start because it has a written version, but it also talks through stuff a little bit slower, and we kind of talk through things a little bit more in detail, and I don't ramble quite as much. So that's a good place to start if you're looking for recipes, and if you're just generally trying to cook the things that I'm cooking, that's a good place to go. It's probably a little bit easier to bookmark too. So let's see, other than that, that's also where the live stream schedule lives too. So if you're trying to figure out what I'm going to be cooking on live stream in the next coming couple of weeks, that always lives over there too. I think that goes out like 3 weeks now. So that's a fun place to start. But for now, today we're going to start with our chicken katsu cutlet bowl. So today we're going to be using some leftover, I just mentioned this, chicken katsu, which is in my box here. Looks like this. It's a little bit stale. That's generally what we're looking for. Katsu cutlet bowl, katsu donburi, it must be made with leftover katsu. If it's not made with leftover katsu, the texture is going to be a little bit weird because it's going to be crunchy, which it's not supposed to be. So today we're using our leftover chicken katsu, which we made, I want to say we made that on stream, I think 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half ago. I remember when we were making it that I was talking about why I was making it and what I was going to use the leftovers for. So that all lives over on the YouTube channel too. So cool. Hermina, how's it going? Hello, happy Monday. So as with many things that we cook on this stream, I'm starting off by crushing and mincing. That was 4 cloves of garlic. And then this is right here, about a tablespoon or about an inch's worth of ginger. So we're starting with these 2 ingredients like we often do because we're trying to be working and trying to build layers of umami, which is going to be super important today because we're working with Dashi broth, which is like a very, very umami forward broth because it is derived from kombu. So we're going to have a lot of sea kelp or sea and fishy umami that's going to be coming from that kombu, which is a form of stock that is made from sea kelp. So today we're doing, so this is going to be our ginger, which we're peeling, and then we're just going to do a quick fine mince. Cropper, oh cool, this is your second time tuning in. Yeah, welcome back. Thanks for tuning in again. This is my ginger here. We're going to be doing a quick fine mince here. So for a fine mince, it starts, I always like to say, it starts off essentially as a dice, like so. I like to do it in half because ginger generally tends to be a little bit thick. So slices down the middle, one down the center, and then straight down. And then at that point, you could stop there if you were trying to do a dice. For a fine mince, we just run our knife through it, and that'll give us our fine mince. If you have a real distaste for doing fine minces or doing knife work in general, you can also, I always mention this, that you can put it through a grater, so you can microplane this stuff straight into the pot, straight into your wok in this case, I guess. That always works too. I generally don't like doing that because I don't like cleaning my microplane, so I generally will try and avoid it if I can, but if that's your preference, go for it. Microplanes are really annoying to clean though, so. Okay, so that's our ginger. We're setting that aside as well. And that's going to hit our wok very first, so that's going to be the first 2 things that we throw into our wok. And we're going to treat them for their aromatic elements. So what we're looking for are the fragrant qualities from them. And then next up, what we're going to do is something very similar with our green onions, but today what we're going to do is separate our green onions. You'll see me doing that very, very often because green onions have different qualities about their different parts. So first off, first thing that we'll mention is that if you have older green onions, I think these are only like a day, I think I bought these yesterday, but they're starting to wilt a little bit because they're a little bit old, so they're starting to get brown right here. So I'm gonna pick that off. It's not a big deal if it starts to brown like that. Just pick it off. I usually just chop it off and you can keep going. But what's most significantly important to note about a green onion is that it has two different parts to it. So it has this white part, which is probably the part that was in the soil, and then it has this green part, so this leafy part up here, and it's a little bit more tender and a little bit more leafy. We want to treat those two parts differently because they will behave differently in the wok fry. So if we were to throw the greens of your green onions into a wok fry, unless we chop them really, really large, which I have occasionally done in a couple of Chinese stir fries, but most likely they're probably just going to start falling apart, and then we're going to have just like wilted green onion, which is not going to be very good. It probably just won't taste like anything. It'll probably just get lost in the wok fry, which is kind of a waste because the greens of green onions are really pretty and also really tasty. So what we want to do though, so here I'm chopping up, this is just the whites. So I'm getting to my whites first because these are going to go into our wok fry. So we're actually going to throw them into our wok fry. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to throw it in with my aromatics. So I'm going to throw it in with my garlic and ginger because it is a little bit more durable of a veggie. And it won't quite fall apart in the same way that a green will. Whereas, unlike these whites, so the greens, since they're a little bit more delicate, we're going to throw these as a garnish at the very, very end. And since they'll be a garnish, they won't actually get into any wok fries, so it won't be in any real danger of falling apart. Sarah, Sarah says they're very easy to clean. I guess my bar for cleaning stuff is really low. Yeah, cool. So these are the greens of our green onions. I'm slicing these pretty wide on a very large bias here. I like doing that with pretty much any time that I chop up green onions, and that's mostly because I feel like the larger shape of the bias cut, so it will look like this, as opposed to a regular slice, which looks more like this. The larger shape of this bias cut is going to help the greens of our green onions sort of pop out a little bit more because it's going to be a little bit larger and it's going to just generally like take up a little bit more surface space. So that's really useful, especially if you're working with green onions that you're throwing on like at the very, very end. We're just going to top it, use it as like a topper or as a garnish, so that they like kind of like stick out a little bit more, and then they won't really get lost, especially in something that's like braised, like what we're doing today. Yeah. Cool. So next up, probably the only other thing that is like a absolute requirement to a katsu donburi is the onion. So this one thing is probably, other than the katsu, the only thing that is absolutely like mandatory is probably this onion, maybe the dashi broth too. So what I'm going to do is, you could do it in a couple of different ways. What I'm going to do with it today is I'm going to slice it really, really thin because I like the way that like a really, really thinly sliced sweet white onion kind of has a texture. So it kind of adds this interesting layer of texture going onto the bottom. You could chop it however you want. I've also seen people do like dices on their katsu donburi onions. Really, you could do it any way you want. I like thin slicing it though, so we're going to do it that way. Yeah. So what's most important to note when we slice our onions, so especially if we're slicing, not dicing, is first thing we want to do is we want to chop up both ends, so we're going to lose the root end too, which we don't always do when we're dicing. But the other important thing to note about an onion is that it is shaped in a circle like this. So it has this conical shape. What's super useful, super important to note about that is if we were to chop straight down, what would happen is the sides over here would be a lot smaller than the slices over here because this right here where it's really, really thick kind of meets this edge. And if you were to slice straight down here, you would get these really, really big slices, which is not going to be really great. So what we want to do, and I know that there is an exact angle for like the optimal like even slicing. Our goal here is to get even slices, but in order to get those even slices, we have to chop at a similar angle that the onion is. I don't actually remember what the exact angle is. I think it's like 17 degrees, something like that. But what I'm going to do is, so I'm angling my knife downward like this, and we're going to slice. And if you've done it correctly, what you should end up with is something relatively similar in size for each piece of onion. So here are my end pieces, they look like this. And here are my middle pieces, they look like this, so they're relatively similar in size. What we don't want to do is just start chopping straight down, which you can do, I guess, if you want, but you're going to have like weird little tiny pieces of onion along with like weird little large pieces of onion, which is not the end of the world in a dish like this, but especially if you're like stir frying, if you have like unevenly sized cuts of onion, they're going to start burning if you're wok frying. So that's our onions. Yeah. Hey, how's it going? Yeah, Shakespeare Ghost, that's a good username. What do I use to sharpen my knives? Yeah, lots of people ask that. So I actually haven't sharpened my knives in a little while, and they're feeling a little bit dull, so I might actually do that soon. But I do use a couple of different things. I guess we could talk about it, because lots of people ask about it. So I use a couple of different things. Probably the most important thing to when you sharpen your knife is a whetstone. Kind of looks like this. It's literally a stone. I like to think of it, it's kind of like sandpaper, I guess, basically. It's like really, really fine sandpaper, though. So this is, my stone is, this is a 6,000 and 1,000 grit. So the 1,000 grit being the more like gritty part of the stone. So what we do is we run our knife through it. First thing you have to, I'm not actually going to do it because the stone is not wet. But we hold our knives down and then we use it as a sharpening. So this comes from Japanese knife culture. And it's probably like the most commonly like used thing to sharpen knives. I don't do this super often, so what's useful though is when you get a whetstone, it will have two different sides, so mine is two different sides. So we can sharpen on this side, and then we can flip it over and then use the finer grit and then sharpen on this side. But this is also like super time consuming. I also have two different knives, so I don't do it all the time because when one knife gets dull, I just switch to the one that's not dull, which is maybe a little bit cheating, but it's super useful though, because I don't have to deal with like sharpening my knife all the time. Let me fix this alert box real quick. And then I do a couple of different things. So the other thing that I'll very often do is I'll use a strop, which is literally just a piece of leather, looks like this. And if you've ever seen like a barber sharpening like a straight edge razor, so the thing that they use to just like sharpen shave faces, I'm pretty sure that this is actually just a barber strop. But a strop is literally just a piece of leather. So if you can't find a strop, or if you don't want to go out and buy one, you can literally just use. I have friends that just use belts. You can also use like a really rough grit like jean denim is very common to use too. All of which, what it's essentially doing is just getting like that last step between like what's like 90% sharp and what's 100% sharp. And then the last thing that I'll do is this thing that I do at the start. Pretty much every time that I start cutting is I'll use my steel. So this is an owning steel. And owning steel technically does not sharpen your knife. What it's really doing is just straightening your knife, which feels like it's getting sharper, but what it's really doing is just taking out all of those like micro dents that happen when you chop. So that's why it's really important to do it every time that you use your knife, is because you've got to pull out those little dents in order to make sure that the knife cuts properly. Good question though. Lots of people ask that. I'm glad I could answer. Yeah. Cool. So that's nice sharpening in a nutshell. I don't know a lot about knife sharpening, so I often don't like diving into it in too much detail because I don't think I feel like I'm a real authoritative source on that. But yeah, I hope you get some information. Next up, this is some Daikon Radish. So this is probably in the realm of the things that we're using today. This is probably the trickiest thing to find because it is, actually it was even a little bit difficult for me to find because I had to drive across town for it, and then I live in Chinatown. But essentially what is, so a Daikon Radish is actually relatively easy to find. It's just a form of turnip. And a pickled daikon, as the name mentions, is a daikon that has been pickled. And what it tastes like, so if you're not familiar with it, kind of tastes like, in my opinion, it tastes a little bit like a buttered pickle, because it's pickled, but it's also super sweet, which is nice. It's also super sweet, which is very nice, and kind of gives this nice, like, interesting texture and like flavor that kind of contrasts the super savory qualities of our dashi broth and all of the umami that we're dealing with. So this is going to give us this nice bit of contrast to everything else that we're working with. Pickled daikon, it comes up in a lot of different cuisine. It doesn't just come up in Japanese cuisine. This actually comes from a Korean market. So you might see these come up in a lot of different things. I actually just used this in a Korean recipe for a bibimbap, gimbap. which is also very similar, and, or like also makes use of the same thing. So it comes up in a lot of different cultures. Cool. Let's see. All right, let's get to our katsu. So next up, this is our katsu, which is probably like the main event, I guess. This is actually katsu cutlet that I made on stream. I think it was a week and a half ago. I think I did it like Thursday, 2 weeks ago, something like that. So they're very, very stale. As you can imagine, they're almost 2 weeks old. So that's actually a really important quality about katsu, or katsu donburi, is that it has to be stale. So if you're working with katsu that's fresh, or if you're trying to like, make it chicken katsu and then make donburi from the chicken katsu that you just made, the texture is going to be a little bit weird, because what you're going to be trying to do is you're going to have this really, really crunchy, crispy quality from the crispy panko, which is the exterior of our cutlet here. And then once you start braising it, it's going to have this, it's not going to get like tender and like braised in the way that cutlet is supposed to be. So if you're trying to make katsu donburi, what I always recommend is start by just making some chicken katsu for dinner, and then from there go on and make an extra one or so, and then make katsu donburi from there. So usually when you see me making chicken katsu, probably a stream following that, it's probably the next week or so, I'll probably be making katsu donburi. What's super important though is that you'll notice that I cut this very specifically in this shape where I didn't let any of these pieces move. So this is like a really iconic part about how chicken katsu donburi is made, is that we're trying to preserve this general shape of the katsu cutlet. So I'm doing my best here not to let this fall apart. And we're going to treat it very similarly. We're also going to be very, very delicate with how we drop it into the wok when we start braising it too. 2-week-old chicken. Yeah, it's not 2 weeks old. I think it's like a week and a half, maybe like a week and 2 or 3 days. But yeah, definitely like, it'll be fine. It hasn't gone bad, but if I was to try and eat this and it wasn't in like a donburi, it would definitely be pretty stale. It's probably not something that I would try and eat, because otherwise it would be a really, really soggy piece of fried chicken for sure. But I also think, like, I'm pretty sure like that's the origin of katsu donburi, is how to make use of stale chicken katsu cutlet, or katsu cutlet. Yeah. Did I freeze them? I probably should have. It'll be fine. That's good. That's probably smart. Yeah. Right, so that's our katsu cutlet. Let's see. That's 2 things. So next up, there are 2 wet elements to our wok fry today. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by sauteing all of our aromatics. So we're going to bloom our garlic and ginger, and then the whites of our green onions. And then what we're going to do is we're going to add our dashi stock. So our dashi stock, today we're just going to be using some powdered dashi stock, because I don't really feel like making dashi stock from scratch. It's not that complicated, but if you are able to get your hands on some fresh kombu, that's basically what it is. It's just a stock made from kombu, which is a type of seaweed. I don't have quick access to that, so I'm not going to bother. But someday on my to-do list, I'll probably make some dashi stock. So real quick, this is just going to be a cup of dashi stock that I'm reconstituting in a little bit of boiling water. Also, if you can't find dashi stock, as you can plainly see, it is very easily accessible as a freeze-dried or powdered stock, so that's really, really useful. Especially if you also can't find kombu, it's really easy to find. If you can't find it locally, you can definitely order it on the internet because it comes powdered, so it's really easy to source. So lots of people ask me, like, what is a good substitute for dashi stock? And I have like a few ideas, but honestly, dashi stock, it's so easy to find like the powdered stuff on the internet, that I would just recommend just go out and find yourself some dashi stock. It's gonna taste a lot better than any of those subs. Isn't that how French toast got started? Yeah, that's exactly it. There's a lot of things that are like really iconic things that we eat that come from just making use of like leftover or stale things. So fried rice, the origin of Chinese fried rice also comes from just making use of leftover and stale rice. Also, like French toast, same thing. It comes from making use of leftover French bread and just like making use out of. I would assume that's where croutons come from too, is just making use of stale bread. So there's a lot of food that comes from leftover culture. It's honestly, some of my favorite dishes come from that because they're generally like the easiest ones to make. They're a little bit forgiving because you're making it from stuff that's not fresh anyway. So like Katsu Donburi, in my opinion, is if you're just getting your feet wet with frying chicken, it's like makes it like super forgiving because if you mess it up, it's not actually going to be that big of a deal. If you like burn the chicken, or if you like burn the chicken in your deep fry, it's not going to be that big of a deal because it's going to be stale anyway by the time that you eat it. So. Yeah, all of those things. Fried rice too is also super forgiving. It's also like fried rice is really useful because it is very adaptable because it is made from leftover ingredients. So that I have a couple. I think there's 4 or 5 different recipes for fried rice on the Wukan Cook channel, but all of them are basically just like these are the things that I happen to have on hand, and that's what I put into it. So that I think coming up this weekend or this Friday is going to be a leftover breakfast fried rice, which is essentially the fried rice my dad used to make from leftover breakfast scraps. So. Stuff like that, always really fun. So that's our dashi stock, and then the last thing I'm going to assemble here is just a really quick sauce that's going to kind of like bone up that dashi stock a little bit, so it's going to give us a little bit more kind of oomph and just kind of punch it up a little bit. This is totally optional, you don't have to add it. It's definitely not like super traditional. But I find it kind of like, especially when you're working with like a powdered stock, like a dashi stock, the one that we're using today, it tends to be a little bit useful because it kind of gives us a little bit more extra flavor and kind of just rounds everything out a little bit. So that's a tablespoon of miso paste. Today I'm using white miso, which I love using because it's a little bit more tangy. And then this is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. Followed by, this is going to be a single tablespoon of mirin. Mirin is a fermented rice wine, so it is a little bit sweet, or actually more than a little, it is very sweet. So we're going to get a lot of sweet qualities from it. Next up, this is a tablespoon of sake, which is going to give us a little bit of brightness. And a tablespoon of rice vinegar, which is also going to do something very similar. And then anytime that, this is actually true anytime that we're working with miso paste, but our main goal here right now is to break down this miso paste. So miso paste, it has a quality about it, especially every time that I use it, that it will clump up because it's a very, very dense paste. This is also true for things like gochujang. I also have a similar problem with dobanjang. Anything that is derived from a paste-like quality. So we want to make sure that this stuff breaks down. So you'll notice in my bowl, it is actually like taking a little bit of work to make sure that this is breaking down. So the main thing that we want to make sure is that when this gets into our wok fry, that it doesn't go in with clumps in it like that. Otherwise, we're going to have big clumps of miso paste floating around. Sarah, oh, you always hear about pickled daikon, but you've never heard of raw. Yeah, I eat raw daikon all the time. My brother eats it a lot because he's like really healthy. You can find it in like a lot of, pretty much, here in the Bay Area, I can find it at pretty much every grocery store. I can find it at like Sprouts, like most American grocery stores. It's like it kind of reminds me of jicama. It doesn't really taste like much. That's why pickle is, because it doesn't really taste like much. But it's really crunchy. It has a lot of nutritional value, so you could throw it in salads and stuff. I personally don't eat it a lot, but you could throw it in a lot of soups too. I think my brother likes to use it in pho or like ramen. But yeah, I honestly don't eat a lot of it because it doesn't really taste like anything to me, so I don't see the point. So that's our sauce. Let's see, last thing that we're doing before we move to the stove is going to be 2 eggs. And these are going to go into our wok fry. I guess like at that point it will be a wok braise. Very, very last, so they're going to go in towards the end. We're going to throw it on top of the katsu. So what it's going to do is it's going to coat the katsu in egg. And we're going to have this nice like egg-coated katsu cutlet, which is going to be the quality that we probably all generally associate with Katsu Donburi. Oh yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, next time that you're at Sprouts, take a look for it. It's like long and white. It kind of looks like an overgrown carrot, but it's white. And I actually have. I'm pretty sure that I have seen them in bags of carrots before too, which is a little bit weird because they're like. Sometimes I see people like call them like white carrots. That's not what a daikon is, but they're like really, really large and like long and white, so it looks like an overgrown carrot. But yeah, it reminds me a lot of like jicama or water chestnut. All of those things that like don't really taste like much, but they have like a very, very distinctively crunchy quality to it. This one's nice. Okay, so that's our egg. We're gonna head over to the stove and get this wok going. So I'm heating up my wok here. We're not actually going to do a whole lot of wok frying today. We're pretty much just going to flash cook our aromatics, and then from there we're pretty much going to just toss in that dashi broth, get that stock boiling, and then throw our katsu in. After that, it's pretty much it. That's pretty much the whole thing. So I love this dish because it is a very, very user-friendly thing to throw together because it is all made from leftover things. So everything that we're throwing together, I didn't buy anything fresh from this. Probably the closest thing that was fresh was the onion. Which I actually had in the pantry for like a week. It's a little bit old for an onion. But other than that, pretty much everything else, it comes together from pantry ingredients, which makes this dish a very, very pantry-friendly dish, as long as you have made at some point in the last week or so chicken katsu. So, yeah. Cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came out with a recipe for this Katsu Donburi, the one that we're cooking right now. And I think I've seen ham charo pop up at least once or twice, which must mean that people are subscribing. Over on the YouTube channel, we're working our way to 4,000 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. We're working our way there to kind of getting there pretty slowly, but I think we're pretty close. I think we're at like 38 and change, something like that. Ham charo is the hamster that's eating ramen. You'll probably see him popping up on the screen every once in a while. He only gets to eat ramen when the people feed him, so please feed ham charo. He's very hungry. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so lots of fun recipes coming up over on the YouTube channel, so if you haven't gone over and subscribed, that all lives over there. It's a fun place to go. That's also, if you notice behind me, there's another stream going on. That's where this stream is going, that laptop behind me. It has nicer cameras and I think a nicer microphone. So, cool, let's do it. So over on my wok, I'm waiting for this to be very hot before we start cooking it. And then the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start by blooming my aromatics. We don't need a whole lot of oil because the only thing that we're frying today is our aromatics. So that was only about 2 tablespoons of peanut oil. And that's my garlic, ginger, and the whites of my green onions going in. And then I like to let those go for just long enough until they become fragrant. Usually for me that's about 10 seconds, but at this point I always recommend that folks start using your nose at this point. When you start smelling garlic, ginger, and onion, that's when you know you're ready to move on. But for me, that's usually about 10 seconds. And then next up, I'm straight into the wok is our dashi stock. And then I'm immediately going to add my wok ring. And that's just because we've got a lot of water. So lots of folks ask about the wok ring. The reason that I'm adding the wok ring, and this is actually true anytime that you see me adding the wok ring, is because there's lots of stuff in the wok that I don't want to spill out. So if you're working in a round bottom wok like I am today, I always recommend getting yourself a wok ring along with it, because otherwise all of that stuff, it could roll off the stovetop, which is not going to be fun. So very often you will see me not using a wok ring while there's not any liquid in the wok, so I like to leave it off because it makes it a little bit easier to stir fry. But once things are in the wok, like things like this now, once there's liquid in the wok, you're definitely going to want that wok ring on. Otherwise, disaster. Yeah, cool. So that dashi stock is going to get going. I'm going to wait for that to boil. It probably shouldn't take that long because it was already boiling when I was putting it together. So I'm going to let that come to a boil, and then what we're going to do is start adding our veggies. Yeah. Oh yeah, there, it's already going. So I'm going to straight ahead, I'm going to add my onions in here first. And then we're just going to look for a little bit of tenderness in these onions. They will take a little bit of time. And I might actually add a little bit more water here. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, Diligentary, how's it going? Yeah, woo. Yeah, that's me. Cool. There's Hamcharo. He does work. Yeah. That's Hamcharo. Hamcharo only gets to eat ramen when you feed him, so please feed Hamcharo. He shows up anytime anyone subscribes on the YouTube channel. Alright. So those are our onions. I'm going to let that come up a little bit. I'm not actually going to add any water at this point because what's going to happen is those onions are going to start shedding a lot of moisture. So that's actually going to increase the volume of our stock quite a bit. So before we start adding water, I'm going to let that kind of shed out a little bit. And then if we still determine that it's still not quite as thick as I'd like it to be, then we're going to start adding stuff. But before we do that, we have just 2 more things that are left to add. So before we have gotten to our onions, or after we let those onions come up to temperature, we still have our Daikon Radish, which are over here in this cutting bowl. These don't actually need to do very much. They're already cooked. You could eat these raw right now. I guess you could technically eat an onion raw too. But mainly what we're looking for is that those onions to kind of come up with a little bit of tenderness before we start moving on. Yeah, it reminds me of Singapore street food. Yes, Singapore, some of my favorite street food, I think. Singapore or Taiwanese street food, probably 2 of my favorites. What's the weirdest food that I have cooked with? Oh, I've cooked with a lot of weird food. It's hard to pick one. The thing that's coming to mind right now, most quickly, is wood ear mushrooms are super weird because they're always wood ear mushrooms are a form of dried mushroom, just kind of like a shiitake mushroom. But since they're sold dry, they're like this big, like really, really small because they condense because all of the moisture gets pulled out of them. And then once you rehydrate them, they're like literally this big because all of the everything just sort of spreads out. It's pretty crazy. They're really, really weird. It's probably some of the strangest ingredients that I have worked with. What else? Taro is a super weird ingredient that I have done. We did some taro cakes, which is a type of Chinese dim sum. If you've ever eaten Chinese dim sum, if you haven't had it, you've probably seen it rolling around on the cart. It kind of looks like a pancake, but it's like really, really gelatinous. And it's usually in a square shape because it's made in a tin. But taro itself is a root, so it's kind of like a potato, but it's also super, super hairy. So before you start peeling it, it just kind of looks like a coconut, but weird and phallic shaped. It's a super weird veggie. There are so many weird things in Chinese food. Many of them I've eaten, but most of them I have not really experimented with. Yeah, not all of them I'm that interested in eating either. The market down the street from me sells frog, or maybe it's toads. They're really large. I think they're toads, but they're super strange. Yeah. So we're mostly looking for a translucent quality to our onions. I'm also paying attention to their texture. I want them to be a little bit tender. I still want them to be pretty, pretty toothsome. So I don't want them to be completely gelatinous. We still want quite a bit of texture. And then before we start moving on to these daikons, before we throw these daikons in, I want them to be pretty much done. Once the daikons are in, we're not actually going to do very much after that. We're pretty much just going to wait for the eggs to set, and that's it. So the majority of our cook time has to be done before we add anything else. So timing super, super important. Otherwise, you could end up with like a really mushy daikon, which is not going to be fun. You're still feeling like the 10-day-old chicken. I'm feeling a little bit worried the more that you bring it up, but I think it's gonna be okay. Usually what I would normally have done is I probably would have made it on a Monday. So normally I probably would have done is made it on Monday last week. But I think Monday last week we were doing a recipe for another recipe that I had done. So I think I ended up doing it on like the Thursday before that, which makes it like, yeah, I guess that would be like 10 days, something like that. So I think it'll be fine. Yeah, I think it'll be fine. How many woks do I own? Right now I own way too many woks. So we're in the process of starting a temporary food vendor booth, so we're going to set up at like farmers markets and stuff. So right now I think I own like 8 woks. That's too many woks. You don't need 8 woks. I own 8 woks, and someone just sent me, someone was super kind enough to send me a wok burner. So I haven't actually gotten a chance to use it yet because I ran out of propane. But it's a really cool wok burner called Wokman, and it looks really cool because it has like 6 burners. So I haven't turned it on yet because I don't have access to propane right now, but I have to go get some propane. But once I plug it in, I'm pretty sure it's going to be a really cool wok burner because it has like a whole bunch of burners, and I think it's going to get really, really even heating. Yeah. I've almost made you feel secure about it. That's well, I'm good. I'm glad that you feel secure about it. All right, so these are our onions. I'm gonna let that get a little bit more cooked down. Yeah. Cool. Have I ever used a whole rooster? No. That's really hard. It's really hard because there's a lot of stuff that goes with like, even in just like a chicken. That's really like, there's a lot of stuff that's going on that I have not actually like made use of. Probably the thing that I'm thinking of right now is chicken feet, which is a very, very common, I guess that's technically a dim sum that comes from Chinese cuisine. But it's like, it's really weird. It doesn't really taste like it. There's no meat. Obviously, a chicken foot doesn't have any meat. So really what you're just sucking on is cartilage. My mom loves them. So does my sister-in-law, but it's a very strange dish. Also, it looks like a foot, so you're eating a thing that still looks very much like a chicken foot, which is super weird. All right, there we go. That's looking good. I'm gonna add a little bit of water because the stock is looking a little bit loose, a little bit tight. And then there's my daikon going in. There's my daikon, and then the next up, probably the most important thing about this recipe, is I'm going to do my absolute best to make sure that this katsu cutlet does not fall apart. So it still looks like the way that it should. Still looks like a katsu cutlet, and then we're going to lay it right on top. So we're trying our very, very best to hold this shape together, and that's going to be a really, really iconic part about how a katsu cutlet is plated. Yeah, this time, Charles. Oh, cool. Yeah, thanks for subscribing. Yeah, cool. Podcast. Oh, yeah. Yeah, lots of people ask about the music. That always lives over on my music page too. So if we're looking for the music, that lives over on the Woo Cooks Beats channel that's down here. Yeah, definitely. If you're looking for the music, definitely check that channel out. I think there's like 100 people on it. It's a very quiet YouTube channel. I don't add to it very often. I definitely don't post weekly the way that we post on the You Can't Cook channel. Next up, I'm adding my sauce here, but I'm not going to add all of it here. So I'm going to add a little bit at a time. That miso paste is going to be very, very condensed and very powerful, so we don't want to just toss that stuff in. You can absolutely over-season at this point, so be careful at this point and don't over-season. And then the last thing going in is my eggs, and I'm very intentionally I'm going to add this on top of the katsu cutlet. And we're going to let that set. At this point, we're just letting those eggs set, and that's pretty much it. So I am going to give it, we're going to let it simmer for maybe like 2 or 3 minutes, and that probably should be enough to let those eggs set. After that, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Oh yeah, always worried to get it soggy. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we definitely don't want any like soggy daikons for sure. Cool, so I'm keeping an eye on my eggs here. We're mostly looking for those eggs to set, and then we should be done. Ready to eat. All right, cool. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST with new recipes out over on the YouTube channel every Friday. So last Friday we came out with the recipe for this katsu cutlet bowl that we're cooking right now. It's in Japanese food, it's called a Katsu Donburi. It's most commonly probably made with pork katsu or pork cutlet, which would be called a tonkatsu donburi. Today we're using a chicken cutlet, so technically it would be a chicken katsu donburi. But you can make it with really any kind of meat that you want, and it'll probably work out fine. Today we're using, this is going to be a little bit of chicken breast that we're cooking with. It comes from a leftover chicken katsu plate that we did. I'm pretty sure that was last Thursday. Someone watching probably knows. Not last Thursday. Thursday 2 weeks ago. 10 days, something like that. So what's really important about a katsu donburi is that we have to very specifically must be using leftover katsu cutlet. If you try and do it with fresh chicken katsu cutlet, the quality about it is going to be really, really crunchy. It's not going to be quite right because you're using fresh fried chicken. So it'll probably still be really tasty because you're using fried chicken. What can go wrong? But it's probably not going to be quite the right quality that we're looking for here. Which is why someone pointed this out recently too. Is that like why would you start and like try it and boil fried chicken? And the reason that you do that is for the very specific reason that we're working with leftover fried chicken. So I'm pretty sure that this recipe originates from making use of stale chicken katsu. And I think, in my opinion, this is actually, I love katsu donburi more than I love fresh chicken katsu actually, because it's like a really, really hearty meal. So one of my favorites, and also is making use of a dashi stock, so it's also where a lot of like umami, like fresh Japanese qualities of umami comes from. Oh yeah, Hermione, yeah, thank you for reminding me. I always forget, but we also take donations over on the YouTube channel. So if you're watching over on the YouTube channel, we have a little donation bar up top. Right now we're raising money to replace the capture cards that go into the cameras, which is a little bit like, has a little bit of tech involved. But essentially what's going on is, so the reason, if you're watching, yeah, almost all of the cameras, especially this camera over here. If you notice, things get like a little bit blurry on this camera a lot, but also the camera over on the stove too, they get a little bit blurry. That's because the capture cards that we're using are really, really cheap. They're made, I think they're like 30 bucks. So right now we're raising money to replace some of those capture cards so the cameras aren't so blurry. I never really ask for money to stream. I don't really do it for money. But I do want to try and like continually just keep trying making these streams better. So if you do have the ability to donate, please do. That all lives over on YouTube. Cool. Yeah. Cool, so our eggs, they look set here. Right now I'm just gonna let this cook down a little bit more so that we have a little bit more thickness to our katsu, and we should be there. Oh, I see, yeah, we're streaming to, I actually don't know what the brand, it's a really cheap capture card. The reason that they're cheap is because there's 4 of them, because there's 4 different cameras. So there's the cutting board camera, it streams to both Reddit and YouTube, and then the stove camera streams to both Reddit and YouTube. So the reason that they're cheap It's because I had to buy 4 of them. Normally they're about $100 each. The ones that we're using are like 30 bucks or something, which works because we were able to buy 4 of them. But it's also a problem because they're really blurry. All right, so over on the cutting board, I'm setting up, this is my rice here. We're also using, for what it's worth, this is leftover rice, which is actually gonna work out great. It's not gonna be a problem. If we were doing a stir fry, if we were trying to eat mapo tofu or Pao Chicken or something, it probably would be a little bit stale and definitely like a little bit clumpy, so we can even pick it up. You can notice that it is a little bit clumpy. With a Katsu Donburi, it's gonna be just fine because we're gonna be covering it in dashi broth anyway, so it's not a big deal. So, fully making use of a lot of leftover things today. All right, and so what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna do my very best, just like we did when we put it in, to keep this cutlet together here. I don't think I'm gonna be able to get all of it because I don't have a big enough spatula, but we're gonna end up breaking it a little bit. But just like when we put it in, I'm doing my absolute best to make sure that it does not fall apart when it gets into the bowl. Alright. I probably should put this in. Fine. Cool. So here's our katsu cutlet. We did a pretty decent job of holding it together. I'm finishing this off. This is my greens. That is it. Oh man, this might be the first time we've finished a stream in 45 minutes in a long time. Cool. Can you have the other half? Yeah. Let's give it a taste. Oh yeah. Like really nice quality. It's like not overwhelmingly anything, so it's not too salty, not too savory. It's also all very, very subtle from that dashi broth, but also like very, very chewy and tender from the leftover katsu cutlet. Definitely, if it was fresh, it would have a crunchy quality, which is not really what I'm looking for. But yeah, definitely. Honestly, in my opinion, I like this dish more than I like fresh chicken katsu. It's one of those dishes that I grew up eating. Yeah. In case the chicken fights back. I'm pretty sure it will be okay. But yeah, I do have Pepto on hand. I'm not too worried. Cool. In case the chicken fights back. Cool. Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. If this is your first time catching one of these streams, we're here every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday at 6:30 PST. Today we're doing a fried chicken katsu cutlet bowl, which is called a Katsu Donburi. Comes from Japanese food. It makes use of probably one of the more iconic types of fried chicken that comes, probably in general, maybe just period, probably some of the most types of fried chicken that you'll find. Definitely, when we're talking about Japanese fried chicken, this is probably the single most iconic fried chicken, which is a type of fried chicken called katsu, and it is specifically made by breading it with panko breadcrumb. So when it is fresh, it is very, very crunchy because it's covered in panko breadcrumb. And then fried. When it's stale, like this, it has this really interesting like bready and like tender quality that happens when panko gets stale, which makes it very, very useful to drop into a pot of dashi stock like we just did, and then throw it over some rice. So this is honestly one of my favorite leftover dishes to make use of because it is super simple. This is probably the first time we've finished a stream in under 45 minutes or under an hour. But also like it makes use of a lot of leftovers. So almost everything that we used today we were using that was leftover chicken katsu, but also leftover rice, a little bit of leftover daikon radish, and a pretty old onion that was like a week old onion. So everything, I didn't go to the market for anything today. This is all like leftover stuff. So when we're talking about like making use of leftover things, this is a really great one. And generally, if you have leftover katsu in your pantry, a really useful one to keep on hand. And what I usually do is when I make chicken katsu, so when I'm making a chicken katsu plate, which we did last Thursday, I'll probably make an extra one, so I'll probably make 5 or 6 of them, and then I'll keep those extra ones on hand. And probably what I should start doing is freezing them. I didn't actually think of doing that until someone mentioned it. Yeah, would it work for pork? Yes, that's super probably more common than chicken katsu cutlet is a pork cutlet, and that would be called a tonkatsu. So if you've seen see the term tonkatsu donburi, that's probably the more common dish to see floating around. I think in the States, you more commonly see chicken katsu, but that's definitely like outside of. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I see both all the time. My preference has always been chicken katsu because it's a little bit more tender. Tonkatsu cutlet or tonkatsu is made from a pork chop, which is a little bit can be a little bit chewy if it's not cooked quite right. Even when it's cooked right, it's still a little bit toothsome. So my preference, if I have a choice, I'll usually go for a chicken cutlet or chicken katsu. Yeah. Yeah, cool. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So that's chicken katsu donburi. So if you're looking for the recipe, that always lives, as with pretty much everything that we cook on stream, over on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't checked the YouTube channel out yet, that all lives over. If you're watching on Reddit, the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the channel you're already on. We're working our way to 4,000 subscribers by the end of the month. You've probably seen there he is. There's Hamcharo. You've probably seen Hamcharo popping up all the time. Hamcharo only gets to eat ramen when people subscribe, so please feed him. He's very hungry. And we recently got him working again. Hamcharo wasn't showing up for a long time, so I think we recently got him working again. If you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and feed Hamcharo. He's very hungry. What else? We're streaming every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday. So tomorrow we're doing, I believe, I want to say pad thai. I think we're cooking pad thai tomorrow. I'm not actually sure. I forget what we're cooking tomorrow. I actually probably should know this. Tomorrow we're doing Pao Chicken, which is also one of my favorites. And I actually did go out and buy fresh veggies for that. So I went specifically out and picked up a red bell pepper because I have begun to believe that Pao Chicken can only be made with a red bell pepper. When you don't make Pao Chicken with a red bell pepper, it looks super weird because it's the only source of color. So I always in the headspace of, honestly, I feel like orange bell peppers taste better, but they don't look as pretty because they're not quite as bright. So we're doing Pao Chicken. That's happening tomorrow, and then Thursday we're going to be doing beef chow fun is happening on Thursday. We're going to explore all of the problems that I have ever had with beef chow fun rice noodles. So. Lots of fun stuff coming up. If you haven't yet, definitely hop over to the YouTube and subscribe. That's a good place to subscribe and get updates, and you'll get notified every time we go live. It's a fun place to go. Cool. Let me know if you have any more questions too. I always miss stuff all the time, especially when I'm facing that direction because I can't see the cameras or I can't see the screens. So if you have any questions and if I missed it, feel free and repeat yourself. Don't feel self-conscious about repeating stuff because I miss stuff a lot. Cool. Thanks everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Everybody's got to grow up. Sometimes funny how we shoot the move. Still, will we fight it, baby? Alright, never mind. Then I found what I'm looking for, baby. Yes, I found it now. Alright, I'm finally in love with love, and it's bringing me down. and everybody wants to be nothing. I still got streets, but they don't love me like they used to love it. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want it. And yes, I still got streets, but more like a toolkit of my 20s, and it's breaking me down. Want to be, baby, yes I want to be. coming out of left field. Ooh, all the rebels just for kicks now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Got another mouth to feed. Leave it